1916. The year millions fell asleep. In the winter of 1916, something strange began happening across Europe. First, it seemed harmless. A young soldier, complaining of exhaustion. A factory worker, unable to keep his eyes open. A mother, falling asleep at the dinner table. But then something terrifying followed. They didn't wake up. Not the next morning. Not the next week. Some slept for months. Others, for years. And some never woke again. Doctors were baffled. Governments were silent. Families watched helplessly as their loved ones slipped into a strange, silent world between sleep and death. Spread through Austria, Germany, France, Britain, and eventually the United States. Millions would be affected. And yet today, more than a century later, the mystery remains unsolved. This is the story of the strange epidemic that began in 1916. The year millions fell asleep. By 1916, the world was already drowning in catastrophe. Europe had become a battlefield. For 2 years, the Great War had consumed entire nations. Millions of soldiers lived in muddy trenches stretching hundreds of miles across the continent. The air was thick with artillery smoke, poison gas, and the constant sound of gunfire. Entire towns disappeared overnight. Families received telegrams announcing the deaths of fathers, sons, and brothers. War had become the rhythm of daily life. But even in a world already surrounded by death, something far stranger was beginning to unfold. In quiet villages, busy cities, and military hospitals, doctors began noticing a strange pattern. Patients arrived with unusual symptoms. First it looked like exhaustion, then fever, then confusion, and then sleep. The first detailed cases were recorded in Vienna, Austria in 1916. A young neurologist named Konstantin von Economo began documenting something he had never seen before. Patients came into hospitals complaining of severe headaches. Many had high fevers. Some experienced double vision. Others became strangely disoriented, unable to concentrate, unable to stay awake. But then something happened that frightened even the most experienced physicians. The patients began falling into deep, unnatural sleep. This was not ordinary sleep. Some patients slept for 20 hours a day. Others could not be awakened at all. Their bodies were alive, breathing, hearts beating normally. But their minds seemed trapped somewhere unreachable. Dr. von Economo studied dozens of cases. He realized this was not simple exhaustion, nor influenza, nor war trauma. Something was attacking the brain itself. The disease struck randomly. Children, adults, elderly. It crossed class boundaries and geographic borders. Neurologists scrambled to understand what was attacking the brain's deep structures, particularly the basal ganglia that control movement and consciousness. Was it a virus? Bacterial infection? Some environmental toxin? Post-influenza complication? The Spanish flu pandemic overlapped, leading to theories of connection. No one knew. In 1917 he gave the condition a name. Encephalitis Lethargica. It meant inflammation of the brain that causes extreme sleepiness. But naming the illness did not solve the mystery. In fact, the epidemic was only just beginning. By 1918 the strange disease had spread across Europe. Hospitals in France, Britain, and Germany began reporting identical symptoms. Patients arrived confused and exhausted. Then came the deep sleep. Entire hospital wards filled with people who appeared frozen in time. Some lay motionless for weeks. Others stared blankly, unable to speak, unable to move. The disease had crossed the Atlantic. Soon doctors in New York, Chicago, and Boston were reporting the same terrifying cases. Some patients eventually woke up. But many awoke to a life that no longer felt like their own. Their bodies had changed. They moved slowly, stiffly, like statues. Some could barely speak. Others could not move at all. They developed Parkinson-like symptoms, rigid muscles, frozen expressions, inability to initiate movement. Some could track movement with their eyes but couldn't turn their heads. Some could hear conversations but couldn't respond. They were conscious, trapped in motionless bodies. Living statues. Doctors had no explanation. No clear cause. No treatment. No cure. Doctors later described them as living statues. Their minds were awake, but their bodies were trapped. By the 1930s, the epidemic slowly faded. No one knew why. No cure had been discovered. No clear cause had been proven. Some scientists believed it was connected to the 1918 influenza pandemic. And then, as mysteriously as it appeared, Encephalitis Lethargica vanished. After 1927, new cases became rare, then nearly non-existent. Pandemic simply stopped. But the victims remained. Tens of thousands of people who'd entered catatonic states in the 1920s stayed that way. For decades. They were housed in chronic care facilities, nursing homes, psychiatric hospitals. Their families visited less over time. Some were abandoned entirely. The world moved on. These patients didn't. They aged physically but remained frozen in time psychologically. Their last conscious moments in the 1920s, their bodies slowly deteriorating through the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Imagine, you're 25 years old in 1920. You feel tired, increasingly drowsy. Then one day you can't move. You can hear nurses talking but you can't respond. You want to scream but your mouth won't open. Days pass, months, years. The room changes. The nurses age. Visitors stop coming. You're aware sometimes but imprisoned. Then nothing. Or dreams. Or a gray space between consciousness and absence. 40 years pass. In 1969, Dr. Oliver Sacks, a young neurologist working at Beth Abraham Hospital in the Bronx, encountered these patients. Some had been catatonic since the 1920s. They sat motionless in wheelchairs, their faces expressionless, their bodies rigid. Medical staff treated them kindly but assumed they were essentially gone, alive biologically but absent mentally. Sacks wasn't sure. He looked into their eyes and saw something. Awareness. Presence. People trapped inside. He learned about L-Dopa, a new drug being tested for Parkinson's disease. Encephalitis lethargica survivors had Parkinson-like symptoms. Maybe. In 1969, Sacks began administering L-Dopa to his patients. And they woke up. Not gradually. Suddenly. Dramatically. People who hadn't moved in 30 to 40 years began walking, speaking, laughing, crying, experiencing the world again. One patient who'd been frozen since 1926 woke in 1969 to discover cars everywhere, televisions in every room, people talking about space travel. She'd fallen asleep in the jazz age. She woke in the space age. Another patient asked about the president. When told it was Richard Nixon, he was confused. Who? Last I remember, Calvin Coolidge was president. The awakenings were miraculous and heartbreaking. These patients hadn't just lost decades. They'd lost everyone. Their parents were dead. Their siblings were elderly strangers. Their children, if they had them, were middle-aged adults who barely remembered them. The world they'd known was gone. Jazz clubs replaced by discotheques. Silent films replaced by color television. Horses replaced by interstate highways. The technology, fashion, language, culture, all alien. Some adapted remarkably. They marveled at television, asked endless questions about the moon landing, struggled to comprehend computers and Vietnam and rock music. Others couldn't cope. The shock was too profound. They'd been paused at 25 and woke at 65. Their bodies old. Their minds still young but displaced by 4 decades. And then came the cruelest part. The awakenings were temporary. L-Dopa didn't cure them. Temporarily reactivated brain function. But after weeks or months, side effects emerged. Involuntary movements, mood swings, the drug's effectiveness diminished. Some patients began cycling. Periods of wakefulness followed by return to catatonia. Others developed severe side effects that required reducing the medication, causing them to slip back into stillness. Dr. Sachs documented everything in his 1973 book Awakenings, not as medical case studies but as human stories. He wrote about their personalities, hopes, fears, the profound tragedy of being given consciousness back only to have it fade again. The book became influential. In 1990, it was adapted into a film starring Robin Williams as Sachs and Robert De Niro as a patient. The movie brought the story to millions who'd never heard of encephalitis lethargica. But the real patients, those who experienced these brief returns to life, their stories are even more profound than any film could capture. Imagine waking after 40 years. Your mother is dead. Your father is dead. Your friends are gone. The world is unrecognizable. And because doctors are honest, this awakening might be temporary. You might slip back into the silence. How do you process that? What do you do with your limited time? Some patients desperately tried to reconnect with remaining family. Others wanted to experience everything: TV, music, food, conversation, cramming decades of missed life into weeks of clarity. Some just wanted to be heard. To tell someone they'd been conscious all along, aware but unable to respond, living inside a prison of immobility for decades. Dr. Sachs listened. He recorded their stories. He treated them as people, not cases. Most of those patients are gone now. The last encephalitis lethargica survivors have died. But their story remains as one of medicine's most haunting mysteries. Because here's what we still don't know. What caused it? Likely viral, possibly related to Spanish flu, but never definitively proven. Why did it disappear? No idea. It simply stopped happening after 1927. Could it return? Unknown. A few suspected cases have appeared sporadically, but nothing like the 1916 to 1927 pandemic. Why did some people remain conscious inside their frozen bodies? Brain imaging wasn't available then, so we can only guess based on their testimonies after awakening. Modern neurology has theories but no answers. Encephalitis lethargica remains one of medicine's great unsolved mysteries, a disease that affected 1 million people, then vanished, leaving victims frozen in time for decades. The story of these patients forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How many people in long-term care facilities are more aware than we realize? How much consciousness exists behind unresponsive faces? What does it mean to be trapped inside your body, aware but unable to communicate? For decades passed in what felt like a blink, or an eternity of trapped awareness. For some, the awakening was a gift. Brief, fragile, but real. A chance to say goodbye, to experience life once more, to prove they'd been there all along. For others, it was cruelty, showing them everything they'd lost, then taking consciousness away again. Dr. Sachs wrote, "To be a patient with encephalitis lethargica was to experience a lifetime, often several lifetimes, in one lifetime. They were time travelers who never left their beds. Witnesses to history who couldn't participate. People whose lives were stolen by a disease we still don't understand. In 1916, people started falling asleep. 40 years later, a few woke up. And they found the world had left them behind. That's not just medical history. That's one of the most profound human tragedies of the 20th century. And we still don't know why it happened. History remembers wars. It remembers kings, revolutions, and great discoveries. But sometimes, history forgets the quiet mysteries, the strange epidemics, the unanswered questions, people who simply fell asleep. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to see more forgotten mysteries of history, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell us what historical mystery we should explore next. And as always, thank you for watching.